Thank you to Kiwi PyCon for letting me give this talk. I love giving this type of talk. It's something that's very much a passion of mine. If you walked in the room late, Joelle Maslak, she, her. Python is a big deal at my employer. We do a lot of Python. I'm on the network team, as already mentioned, and yeah, if you watch Netflix stuff, you're using some Python, probably. I want to start by talking about, I see there's one of my people here. There are different kinds of brains, and that's what this talk is about. It's about neurodiversity, which is just the idea of many different kinds of brains. My brain has a label. My label happens to be autistic. But if you're not autistic, I'm going to invite you to meet me halfway in my part of autistic culture in this talk. You may notice that in addition to my American accent, I have a little different rhythm and pacing to my speech. That's my autistic accent. This is my halfway between my culture and allistic or non-autistic culture. So I invite you to meet me in that same halfway. If you don't know this reference, you're missing out. It's a Star Trek: The Next Generation reference, one of the best episodes of Star Trek. And it's not quite about meeting halfway, but it is about cooperation and working together. So within that in mind, there are a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be autistic, and I just want to get them out of the way before I talk more widely about neurodiversity. For instance, one of those misconceptions is that autistic people take things literally. And I want you to know that's just not true. I also know that autistic people are not supposed to do humor, but I do forget sometimes, and I'm trying to get better at that. Also, being an American, I'm told that sometimes we don't have a good grasp on geography, which as an American kind of surprised me. But then I said, okay, where is Kiwi PyCon? And so, being an American, I went to the trustworthy ChatGPT tool to find out where PyCon was, and I started with where is New Zealand? Being that's left off a lot of maps. I prompted that to GPT saying, New Zealand's left off a lot of maps. Can you show me on a map where it is, where it should be on the map? And correctly, it said it's located, Australia's located a couple thousand kilometers away. Sure enough, that's exactly where it put New Zealand. I will note that ChatGPT is an American company. So as you can see, we do know geography. This is the last time I'm going to mention generative AI. And this is the one and only generative AI slide. So let's talk about neurodiversity. And one more thing I'll probably throw out is this meeting me halfway. And we're going practice. Clapping can be hard for some autistic people. So we're going to do either deaf applause, or you can do any other kind of stim or movement with your hand, or you can flap your hands. That's acceptable. Any of those will help you get into the halfway. So we're going to try that now on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's lovely. I love that. So thank you for humoring me on that. Starting with what is neurodiversity. I'm not going to do a lot of terms. I hate diversity talks at work that start with a vocabulary lesson because you know there's going to be a vocabulary quiz at the end. And in my opinion, that doesn't necessarily make anyone more inclusive, knowing the vocabulary. But I do want to just define my terms because I do see these terms misused sometimes. Neurodiversity, everyone is part of neurodiversity. Whether your brain has a label, whether your brain doesn't have a label, you're part of neurodiversity because there's an infinite number of ways human brains work. Not all brains are neurodivergent, but they're all part of neurodiversity. Some of us might not even have a label. That's perfectly fine. Those brains are part of neurodiversity too. Neurodivergence is the idea of a brain that isn't working in ways that are considered typical. And that's controversial because is there a typical brain? Well, probably not. But there is, society does expect a certain pattern of a brain. And brains that don't work in that way are that's a neurodivergent person, or their brain is neurodivergent. So that's your 3 vocabulary words for the day: neurodiversity, neurodivergent, neurodivergence. A lot of labels can fit into neurodivergence. I've talked about autism already, but that's hardly the only way a brain can be neurodivergent. There are labels sometimes that get applied to brains, so things like epilepsy, PTSD, ADHD, autism is already mentioned, dyslexia. That's just a few. There's plenty of others. There's also people that don't have the label for their brain, but still have a brain that operates maybe in a way that's not considered typical. To kind of explain this, I'm going to jump into a controversy, and that's the social model of disability. Not everyone that's neurodivergent sees themselves as having a disability or being disabled, but many of us do. For me, my neurodivergence is a disability, but it's not a disability because I see my brain as necessarily broken. There are things that I wish it could do that it can't do. That's a different thing, but I don't see it as necessarily broken. I imagine everyone with that thinks about their brain, there's things that they wish it could do that it just doesn't do, and that's fine. Where the social model of disability comes in is society accommodates certain patterns of brains, and it doesn't accommodate other patterns of brains. Certain abilities are expected that everyone has, and then other abilities, it's not expected that everyone has. So certain profiles, using a word that I'm not a big fan of, are kind of considered normal. This figure on the right is from a research paper, but this research has been going on for decades, doing the same kind of thing, this test is called the embedded figure test. And the idea in this particular paper that I got it out of was you'd have a lot of these kind of figures, and you'd take the figure on the left, look at it, and then in the figure on the right, you'd trace it with a pencil and highlight that shape in the figure on the right. This paper talked about using this with children, both an autistic group and a non-autistic group. And one of the interesting things they found was what a lot of other researchers have found with this test, and that's autistic kids do it quicker than neurotypicals. So it's an ability that autistic people have that neurotypicals generally don't. That's not something that society necessarily expects people have, so maybe the kids don't get the recognition when they have these skills and abilities. And of course, not every autistic person's going to do great on this. When I did an adult version of this, I did really, really bad because it was so easy. I knew I was misinterpreting the instructions, so I did something completely different. But not everyone's going to find it easy that's autistic. There's neurotypicals that are going to look at these kind of things, and when you measure their response time, are going to do fantastic. It's like everything else in humans. There's no clear lines. It's always a fuzzy line. But the interesting thing with this paper and the previous papers on this is how the papers phrased autistic people doing better at this. It wasn't, oh look, autistic people are really good at this thing. How can we tap into that? How can we use this? It was instead, well, autistic people did good on that, and that's because they have a deficit. That's because they're broken. Being good at this shows you're broken. And it was typically referred to as poor central coherence, so not being able to see the whole. So it's interesting that in this social model, we've taken something that's an actual strength of autistic people and turned it into a deficit because it doesn't match the typical. This is another paper that's the reference, but in this paper, they looked at autistic and non-autistic people in a functional MRI to see which areas of the brain light up during hypothetical moral questions, ethical questions. So they would ask questions that maybe you would benefit a certain amount, but it might hurt other people a certain amount. Or maybe it would benefit other people, but maybe hurt you a little bit. And looking at how autistic people versus non-autistic people answered these questions. There's flaws in that kind of research because what people are going to do with their head inside a functional MRI, being asked obviously fake questions is not necessarily what they would do in real life. But there was one finding that they found, and that was that autistic people tended to not give a different answer whether they said in the hypothetical scenario that other people would know their choice or not. So basically acting the same way in public and private. So essentially this was a test for hypocrisy. And turns out the autistic people in the program were tended to be less hypocritical and react the same way whether someone was watching or not. As an aside, I think this watching versus not watching explains a lot about electoral politics, but I'm not going to get in there because I'm American and you all know what's going on there, and yeah. The paper, though, saw this as a deficit, that having consistent morals was a deficit. They said, and this is a direct quote, ASD individuals, that's autism spectrum disorder individuals, unlike healthy control subjects, so a little bit of judgment there, blurred the distinction between private and public conditions when making moral decisions. So this is a deficit now. They further said, our results fit the literature on moral judgment, which has shown that ASD individuals exhibit an excessive valuation of negative consequences when judging the moral appropriateness or permissibility of actions. So autistic people care about the bad things happening. And that's bad. And yet we're told we don't have empathy. It's interesting. This is where that sin of empathy comes from. The idea of sin of empathy is you should be selfish. That's an interesting view. And I'm not saying that autistic people are more moral than non-autistic people. Again, it's fuzzy lines. I can think of at least one trillionaire that I don't think has particularly moral decisions. So I'll leave it at that. Another aspect of social disability, I say patterns of abilities and weaknesses. I talked about some autistic strengths. This is one that a lot of autistic people have as a weakness relative to a lot of neurotypicals. And these are the same person, right? They are to me. If I see these two people in different situations, I'm probably going to assume they're the same person. I'm not going to know whether it's Picard or whether it's the former CEO of Microsoft. I'm not going to be able to tell that. That has disadvantages, definitely. One of the disadvantages is if the CEO walked into a meeting where I was giving a presentation, I wouldn't know that was the CEO, so I wouldn't change any of my presentation. If I knew it was the CEO, I probably would. I'd probably tailor it to my audience, and my audience would be, I don't get to be in the room with the CEO very often, so I want to make sure I say what I want the CEO to hear. Instead, the CEO is going to be treated like an engineer if the CEO walks into one of my meetings. And that's maybe a minus a lot of times. But what's interesting is this ability is super important in society, and the embedded figure test is not. We've made these choices as a society. And my last kind of talk on the social model disability, this is an Australian passenger landing card. And I would almost bet money it was not written by an autistic person. If it was, it would probably say what they're actually interested in. I also kind of question who's going to declare all the illegal stuff. But whatever, and these questions have yes or no check boxes that you tick. This third one is, do you have goods obtained overseas or purchased duty and or tax-free in Australia with a combined total price of over $900 Australian, including gifts? And well, I'm autistic, so I have this computer, I have a watch on, I have a phone. Of course I have over $900 Australian coming into Australia, and I suspect most non-Australians on that flight probably did. So I check yes. I'm going yes, most of my fellow passengers check no. Because customs wasn't really interested in my computer that I'm going to take out of the country with me. They were more interested in, am I doing something that's going to get around Australia's tax system or similar? Of course, I checked yes, went up to the customs agent. Custom agent looks at my card, and I can almost see, oh, we've got one of those. When he asks, well, what are the goods you're bringing? And I say, well, I've got a laptop and a phone. And yeah, the look is like, yeah, so does 90% of the people on this plane. Checking yes doesn't tell me anything if everyone checks yes for this. But it was no big deal, Australia. They were lovely with me across the border. But that's a question that a neurotypical might have written. It's not one an autistic would have probably written. We would have said, not including personal items that you're going to leave the country with. So that's enough 101. That's setting the groundwork. Now a little on to 201, a little more advanced stuff. Starting with, how do we fit into capitalism? And of course, we know autistic people fit capitalism perfectly, or not just autistic people, but neurodivergent. Actually, no, I revised that because it turns out that capitalism is not structured for neurodivergent brains. It's part of the same society that operates with the same social model of disability, so it doesn't really fit us. So one example of that is we may have a strong sense of justice. Remember that study I said that said we worry about autistic people in this case, but it could be other kinds of brains, worry about negative consequences of actions. That doesn't really fit capitalism, because capitalism's morality is based on making money, nothing more. And you can make a lot more money sometimes doing something that is unjust. We see that all over the world. And someone that has a strong sense of justice may find it very hard to work in any part of that. And I'm not saying that neurotypicals don't have that same strong sense of justice. Again, these are fuzzy lines. But there's something in our industry in particular that I see a lot, and that's this neurotypical full stack developer. And this has nothing to do with front end and back end. This is something different. This is a way of devaluing support roles. So whereas you could hire experts on technical writing and project management and all these other tasks, instead, we've settled for, well, the average person, the typical person, is good enough at them for us to get by. And I think that's a disservice to the people that know this stuff really, really well. And so now, instead of just the core duties, you have all these other duties for a software engineer. So a software engineer might have to project manage, write documentation, code, of course, coordinate with other departments, test code, negotiate, gather user requirements, mentor others, and advocate for their budget. That's a lot of skills. And they're expected on every one of them to be at least at this typical neurotypical level. So someone that has ADHD and maybe is project management is not their strong point, and there is ADHD project managers that it is a strong point, but for some people it's not. they're going to get dinged for not being a great project manager on their projects. And that's going to maybe even overshadow the things that they're really good at, their core skills, the reasons that they were probably hired. Instead, they're going to probably get performance evaluations that say you need to get better at keeping track of what you're doing and staying focused and all this other stuff. That's that neurotypical full stack developer. And it's a very big problem for a lot of neurodivergent people who have profiles that don't match the same pattern. Even though this person maybe, when you looked at their skills, they have other skills that are really great. Maybe that ADHD person isn't great at project management, but maybe they have a really out-of-the-box way of thinking that has let the company avoid a lot of pitfalls. That's something you should want. But a lot of times, this neurotypical full-stack developer idea doesn't allow it. So I present this slide mainly to say, if you aren't fitting, it's not you. It's this capitalism we're operating in. But we still want to try a lot of times to operate in this. We want to be able to succeed in our careers. Well, there's something that won't work, and that's trying harder. That's a lesson that a lot of us have had. One of the most common responses to neurodivergence is, well, you just need to focus more. You need to give more attention. You need to pay more attention to what you're doing. Double check your work. You need to keep track of your homework. You need to do all this. When I went to school, I was like first generation of people where my grades were sent to my parents via computer printout. And the teachers would have a list of like 30 different comments they could check and would get printed on that report card with my grades. And I didn't do good in school. And the comment I would always get was, and I can remember the exact phrasing to this day because I got it for 13 years of education, pretty much every single teacher. And that's, your child has more potential than he/she uses. So it was, your kid is lazy. That was the message, and I internalized that. As an adult, I look back and I say, no, that part of that was right. I probably did have more potential than I was able to use in that environment. It was a failure of the school, not a failure of me. I was working a lot harder than a lot of the people in that class and doing worse because that environment wasn't suited to me. So if there's one thing you take away from this talk and nothing else, you're not lazy. Take that out of the room. The other thing that can and can't help is tech. You've probably heard that you can't solve people problems with tech. That's true, but a lot of us in this room, we're in tech because we see the promise of tech. We see what tech can do. But what we don't need is a tech savior parachuting in. There's two things in disability that I absolutely despise. The first one is disability simulations. The idea here is I can put on a blindfold, stumble around a room for 5 minutes, and now I know what it's like to be blind. That's absurd. Most blind people have been blind longer than 5 minutes. They've developed skills and abilities just like I have as a sighted person. I use my eyes to navigate around. A blind person may use other means to navigate around. So they're probably not stumbling around the room like I would be. In addition, in that 5 minutes, I'm not going to see a lot of areas of their life that probably frustrate this person. I'm going to just see, oh, suddenly when I have no skills and no practice at this, I'm bad at it. Well, of course I am. So that's my rant on disability simulation. I've seen some of the autistic simulations, and autistic people kind of chuckle at these because they're like, oh, that's what being autistic is like. Now I know, and such. And the problem there is someone that's not autistic can't put themselves in the shoes of an autistic person any better than a person that's autistic can put ourselves in the shoes of someone that's neurotypical. We don't have a common reference point. One of my least favorite questions is, what's it like to be autistic? And I always turn around and I'm like, well, what's it like to be allistic or non-autistic? Because, yeah, what's it like? Who knows? You can't compare because you don't have a reference point. The second thing, though, is hackathons. And this stems from the same problem. And I'm talking disability hackathons in particular. Other kinds of hackathons, fine. But one of the ideas is, we're going to help the less fortunate. We have these tech skills. We have this really great knowledge that can be useful to other people. And we want to do good. So the intent is good. But how long do you spend learning about the actual needs? Well, for a hackathon, not very long. Maybe an hour, maybe less. You're probably not hearing from hundreds of different people that have different needs. You're hearing from you're hearing maybe one specific person, or even worse, what you guess that one person is needing. And then you're going to make a solution in a day or so, and it's not going to understand the nuances. You're not going to have the testing and the usability that's required. And chances are what comes out of that isn't going to be all that useful. The tech person might feel really good. I went and helped someone, but did you really? So I ask if you're interested in helping people. There's plenty of ways to get involved. Learn how to make your app accessible and do that. Learn how to make your community spaces accessible and do that. And realize you're going to miss the nuance. You're going to get things wrong, so also listen. And so with that in mind, I want to talk about maybe ways to meet our needs as neurodivergent people. And I said I'm going to make people meet me halfway. Neurodivergent people, this talk is for you. For people that are neurotypical, you're going to have to kind of meet me halfway and see how can I, what's my role? What can I do? And also, you still have needs, even if you're neurotypical and such. The key here is my needs are not the same as someone else's needs, even another autistic person. My best friend from grade school is also autistic. We're both in tech. We're very similar in a lot of ways. But I prefer communication and writing. That's my native language, is writing. Asynchronous, Slack, absolutely, that's where I'm at home. For him, writing is really a challenge. Reading is really a challenge. And he's really good at spoken communication. We're both autistic. But our needs are completely different, and what's accessible to me is inaccessible to him. So with that in mind, that people are different, even when they have the same labels, how does that fit into employment? Well, I said I'm a network engineer, and you don't need to read this slide. I know it's small text, but this is classic show interface output. This is one of my home routers, and yes, it is switch 8, and I do have more than 8 switches at home. I am a network engineer. I've been looking at this output, which has been essentially unchanged for 30 years or more, for 30 years. So I'm familiar with this output, and I can't get useful information just looking at this wall of text. My brain does not do that. I have to spend a lot of time trying to get the information out of the page. I see that this does not affect my neurotypical colleagues in the same way, where they can look at it and instantly say, oh yeah, the interface is up. It's been up for a long time. And whereas I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh yeah, you're right, but it's a lot slower for me. So I wanted to fix that so that I had the tools I needed to do my job well. Well, that's a superpower if you're in tech, is you can write your own tools. In Python, it's easy to write your own tools. So this is what I did. I colorized it. Green is good, red is bad. I'm not red-green colorblind. If I was, I would probably do it differently. But this tool was written specifically for me. Cyan is information that I might want to know, but isn't good or bad in itself. Like the actual traffic rate on the interface This is very low traffic because I took it while I was in New Zealand, a screenshot, so I'm not using my environment. But that's not good or bad. But I might need to know that, might lead me into understanding a problem. And I see right away, oh, it's up, it's been up for a long time, but I do see input errors, so I probably need to crawl under my house and clean a fiber patch cable somewhere. But it's not that big of a deal because it's been 3,700 errors over the course of 179 days. So yeah, not that many errors. It's not causing any problems. I'm probably not going crawl under there with a fiber cleaning kit until I really need to. The other thing it does is you can see some of the numbers are underlined. It underlines in groups of 3 digits because I can't tell the difference without a lot of effort between 1,000 and 10,000. This solves that problem for me. Don't hack me. I've got some of my IP6 addresses up there. I'm sure you can do it. It's a lot easier to throw a rock through a window than to build a window. But what you'll notice is these different colors of IP addresses. I took this from other autistic people. I took something that other autistic people have that I don't, that is that could be turned into something that could be a useful tool for me. Some people, autistic and non-autistic, have something called synesthesia, where senses combine together. And you'll often hear this as they see numbers as colors. So red might be 7, blue might be 3. I don't have that. But I said, I can't copy an IP address if my life depends on it. I'm a network engineer. I'm working at this major global network where if I typo the wrong IP, I might take us down. I might take some third-party company 2 hops away down. I don't want to do that. So to be able to copy those IPs, I colorize them. So when I type it, if it's the wrong color, I know it's wrong. And that was a real simple way of doing it. Regex, I convert it to a long integer, and along with the prefix length if it's provided, and then use that with modular arithmetic to index into an array that tells me what color to use. There's, I think, 17 colors in the system. That's enough to where most of my typos I spot right away. But I use a lot of other tech. And remember, I'm talking about my needs and kind of hoping to give you some inspiration on what kind of things maybe would help you fit into this weird-shaped capitalism thing, which is definitely not friend-shaped. So one of them is I use a different phone for home and work. Because if I use the same phone, I'd be scrolling at work. And that's not helpful to me because if I'm scrolling too much at work, I'm not going to have a job for long. I related to that, just the distractions in the modern world are a lot for me. So I turn off all the notifications and badges, except when I really, really need them. I mean, these things are engineered to be the most attention-grabbing and distracting thing they can be. That's the design goal. That's what people are trying to do with them. I don't want that, so they're all turned off. It amazes me that people actually have a sound every time a Slack channel they're in gets a message. How can people do that? But brains are different. Some people can. I use grayscale on my personal phone instead of color because that gray screen is less interesting to me. So I'm less likely to just pick it up and start scrolling when it's maybe less visually appealing. And then disabling animations in everything. Your website should respect reduced motion. If it doesn't, you need to do some work there. But disabling the animations, for instance, in Slack, the animated emojis, because they were taking my attention away from the actual message. So that's a setting in accessibility. I encourage everyone to do it, and here's why, not just because it's distracting, but load up a Slack channel if you're on Slack that has a lot of animated reactions. Look at the CPU usage while you're viewing that page, and it'll be higher than you think it is. You turn that off, your battery's going to last longer. you're going to use less electricity. And what I tell people is if millions of us do it, we'll probably save megawatt hours of power, reduce climate change, that teeny bit. That's all a good thing. Reminder stuff, like I don't remember stuff that I need to do, that I want to do. So I have all kinds of reminder stuff, like a light that turns on under my monitor that's linked to my Google Calendar. This is the tech superpower. 3 minutes before my meeting starts. So I work from home. I can see that light come on. I know in a few minutes I'm going to need to log into this meeting. I need to stop what I'm doing now. I have another monitor that's hooked up to a Raspberry Pi that does nothing but show me the tasks I have to do that day. Every day in the morning, I pull out 3 or 4 tasks from my main task list. They show up on that monitor. So I always have it in my peripheral vision. I always have it when I'm like, okay, I just finished something. What did I want to do today? And it's not going to hold me to that, but at least I can have the intent if I'm going to do something different. And then at the end of the day, another script automatically removes everything off of that daily list, puts it back on the main list. That way, when I get in the next morning to work, I don't see my failures. I don't see this task that I didn't get done. I also use a super annoying reminder app. Highly recommend it, particularly if you have any trouble with attention. One of my difficulties is, for instance, I take out the trash for pickup once a week where I live. So I have a reminder once a week on this application. It doesn't need to be done at a specific time. That's why it's not a calendar thing. That pops up and tells me, take out the trash. So, okay, I go get up and, I think the mail came too. So let me go check the mail. And then I go to the kitchen and maybe I'm a little thirsty, so let me get something to drink. And I go back to work, forgetting the trash, forgetting why I got up in the first place. This application, if you're trapped in the Apple ecosystem, is wonderful because 5 minutes later, I didn't say I finished it, so 5 minutes later, it's going to ping me again and say, hey, you need to take out the trash. And I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I meant to do that. And maybe it'll take me 3 or 4 tries, but I will eventually get it done. It also has a really neat snooze function that I haven't seen in other apps, where when the reminder pops up on my phone, I have a button right there to click to say delay it 10 minutes or delay it 60 minutes or whatever else. So if I'm in the middle of a meeting at work and take out the trash comes up, I'm obviously not going to say, hey, everyone, hold on. I've got to take out the trash. I'm going to just hit the 60-minute button and it'll get taken out later. Bunch of other tech, like I use a reader line extension that highlights a line across my screen that follows my cursor, horizontal line. That helps me track the text as I'm reading it across the screen. Lots of captions. That's very important to me. My company is awesome in providing CART when I need it. Browser extensions to hide annoying page elements. I think these are also called ads. But that can be really useful because these ads are designed to attract our attention and keep us from reading the page. The ads aren't there because they want you to read the page. They want you to click and do something else. I resent a computer that's telling me what to do. And then there's a lot of other things, like working from home is huge for a lot of neurodivergent people. If your company is putting out a press release that they're neurodivergent friendly, and you don't let people work from home, I have news for you. And it's not just neurodiversity. It's all disabilities. It's also women. It's also a lot of other groups of people where society is not optimized for that labor at work. So allow people to work from home whenever possible. I'm a big believer in therapy. If you're questioning whether or not you might need therapy, go do therapy. And I recommend someone that's very familiar with neurodivergence or maybe even has the same kind of neurodivergence as you have. If you're looking for therapy, just know you might try some and it doesn't work because their methods and way of working just does not connect to your brain. That's fine. You can ask for a referral to someone else that maybe would be more appropriate. And ethically, they will provide that and they appreciate that. I say no to a lot of work social events because it's like, I don't need to go to the bar after work because I'm not going to hear anything. I'm not going to be able to fully participate anyway, and I'm not going to enjoy it. It's not something that's fun to me. Instead, it's going to exhaust me, and then the next day, I'm going to be useless at work. So if I'm doing an offsite or something with my team, there's times where I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to go back to the hotel because I need to recharge. And then a big one is just asking for help. It's amazing how often when you ask for help, people will be, yeah, I can do that. An example is asking for captions if you need that. Ask for that. Maybe they can't provide it. Maybe there's a reason why it can't be done. But maybe they'll say, oh yeah, we already have that because we're real-time captioning it on YouTube, so yeah, we can present them at the same time. You won't get it if you don't ask usually. And then a bunch of other non-tech, like I use colored overlays for reading things that are printed, like books. Has a line across it as well, so I can track the text across the page. Helps a lot with letters dancing around and words dancing around. Almost always in a conference like this, I'd have a weighted lap pad. It's like a mini weighted blanket. I didn't bring it with me because it's filled with sand, and Customs does not like American sand, and I didn't want to explain that. Fine with Americans, but not our sand. Don't ask me. STEM toys, I think everyone probably knows about them. And then I tell coworkers about my prosopagnosia. That's my inability to recognize people by faces. So if someone comes up to me in the hallway at work, and I'm at the office for some reason, I will just out and out ask, I say, who are you? And it's probably someone I work with every single day. I know them. But I'm just not placing it in the moment. There's not enough cues. I would say one thing that helps is when not everyone at your company looks the same, so yet another reason to include people other than the stereotypical tech worker. Travel, I do tons of travel, so I have a whole set of routines around travel. Like I don't travel and work on the same day, and I'm fortunate enough to have a company that understands that even if I've only got a 1-hour meeting where you want me to be there, I'm going to have to fly in the day before and fly out the day after, and you're going to have to put me up in a hotel for 2 nights. The reason for that is otherwise I'm so stressed out about the travel that's what I'm thinking about and not the work. And when I'm not thinking about the work, I'm not going to do well, and that's going to show up on performance evaluations. I have a document that I keep, a running document that's where the quiet areas in all the airports I fly through are. And sometime if you want to hear whole rant, ask me about sensory spaces in airports, and I have opinions, mainly that they don't think anyone older than the age of 8 could possibly need a quiet space. But I have a doc like, in Dallas, gate whatever is usually not busy in the morning because those are international gates going with red eyes. So that area might be less crowded. I use hearing aids to be able to hear better. I have a noise masking program as one of my options on my hearing aid, so I can switch it to that, the microphones turn off, and I hear white noise that I can control the volume of instead. Incredibly helpful on public transit or a loud airport or something like that. I give myself permission to stim in public. I tell people I'm always in motion. That's just who I am. And I find that the biggest reason people don't stim a lot of times, and I'm not saying that there isn't real discrimination, and certainly different people that are differently situated might experience it differently, but generally at most I'll have someone look at me. I probably won't pick up on that anyway, so it's no big deal. I've never had a problem. I mean, I'll stim through the customs and immigration lines, I'll stim through security. They can deal. And then I ask for pictures or floor plans of places before I visit. I asked Kiwi PyCon for this as an accommodation. And Kiwi PyCon was awesome. I said, I have anxiety entering new spaces. Can you show me the entrance and just highlight the doors I need to go through. And what that meant is when I came to the conference on Friday, I could walk right through the doors. I knew where to go. I also, they sent me some floor plans because conference organizers often, when they're picking venues, they get floor plans. They probably have them. And I knew kind of where the bathrooms were. I knew where the rooms were. It was amazing. I even got a picture from another conference of looking out at an audience set up in a similar way in this room. So it's like I knew what view I was going to have when I was up here. That reduced anxiety so much. If I didn't have that, I probably would have walked past the doors, kind of looked over and seen, is anyone going in these doors? I don't know. Are they with the conference? I don't know. I probably would have walked by them 3 or 4 times. I probably would have sat on a bench, watched people go in, and eventually maybe would have worked up my way to go in. But there's been times where that was too much and I just went home. So just having something as simple as the picture of the building and asking for that reduced so much stress, and now I can focus on enjoying the conference, the thing I want to do. So how do you do this if you want to do some of these things? The first thing is you got to think about disclosure. What do you want to tell people? I tell people everything because I confused the public and private, I think it said. But different people may be in different situations. I know, like, for instance, in the US right now, in the, I don't want to cuss, so I'll say the current political climate, it's wise to be very cautious. If you're someone that might be immigrating, for instance, and you're known to have a disability, there are a ton of countries now you can't go to. So you might want to be very cautious about how you disclose things depending on your situation. Hopefully New Zealand is better, but I still suspect everywhere there's still some stigma. So that's something to think about. And as you're thinking about that, ask, what do I want from this disclosure? Why am I telling someone I'm autistic? Why am I telling someone I have epilepsy? What am I wanting from this? And have you thought of the consequences? And I say bad and good. The bad ones, I think a lot of us think about right away. But there's also good ones. And then, who should you disclose to? Think about who would have this information and where would it be helpful? I do say that if you don't give people a label to apply to you, that doesn't mean you're going to be unlabeled. It's one thing I try not to talk to people about raising kids because I don't have kids, I don't have education in raising kids, I'm not qualified. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of parents that say, I don't want to tell my kid their diagnosis because I don't want them to have a label. Your kid already has a label. My label was lazy. That's not better than autistic. And that can happen as adults too, is if people understand and have that framework to understand you a little bit, then maybe they won't attribute it quite as often to a moral failing because you don't fit that neurotypical pattern. Part of this whole process, though, of like if you want adjustments or accommodations, and I say this in both informal and formal sense, is thinking, I'm not something enough. I'm not disabled enough. Or I don't have a formal diagnosis, so I don't feel right about asking. It can also be manifest in, I don't want to take something that people really need, and I don't really need. And this happens with all kinds of other disabilities. I've had friends that would very much, in some situations, benefit from using a wheelchair, but they don't want to use a wheelchair because other people need that. They don't. And I encourage people, particularly people that might take things literally, so if you're a kleptomaniac, I encourage you to look at this and maybe rephrase this when you see someone saying, hey, if you need accommodations, email us, or something like that. Instead, interpret that as if there are things that could be done that would let you participate better. send them an email. And I encourage people to do that in your, if you have a company page or you have a conference you're putting on or anything else, instead of saying if you need accommodations, let us know, which immediately causes people to self-censor, instead invite those discussions. And sure, you're not going to be able to accommodate everything, but most things are pretty cheap and easy to do. And you're not taking away anything from anyone if you yourself asks for these things. The worst that can happen is the company or the individual either, one, they out themselves as ableist and you don't want to be around them anyway, or they say, yeah, that's a problem because there's a high cost. Most of these things don't have a high cost, but sometimes that can be a factor. Maybe we can find another solution. But now you have that dialogue. So I encourage you, if there's something that would help, ask. Don't be scared off by that need. And as you're asking, have a goal. This goes back to the disclosure. If I walk into HR and say, I'm autistic, I want the accommodations, it doesn't matter even if the HR people are wonderful people, very knowledgeable, understand what autism is. That doesn't help them because remember, Dawn and myself, we have completely different communication styles. So if I got Dawn's accommodations, that would be inaccessible to me. And even the best experts at accommodations and adjustments can't possibly know all of my nuance. So instead, have a goal, focus on what you want rather than the labels. I'm not saying labels are bad, they're not. But you might instead say, hey, I really need this information in written form, or I need, for these meetings I'm going to, I need an agenda before I get to the meeting so I know what's going to be about. Just have a goal. Who do you ask? That's another question. Most corporations would tell you to ask HR or a disability office. And that's fine sometimes, but there's other times where that's not the right approach because it'll be too formal. Maybe they're going to really gatekeep. Maybe they see their function as making sure the company doesn't get sued, but not doing anything beyond not getting sued. That's not necessarily helpful, or maybe it's not actually something they can do at that central level. So I also encourage people to talk to their manager. When you do good and you do good work, your manager gets good performance reviews. So hopefully you're on the same page for wanting you to be successful at work. And if you're not, I hope you're able to find a better place. There's other times where it's coworkers. And an example of coworkers is me telling my coworkers I'm face blind. I'm not going to recognize you in the hallway. I'm not being rude. I do care about you. It's just I don't recognize you. Don't overthink it. And that's something I could tell that to HR, but unless I tell my coworkers, it's not going to be helpful. And then my favorite is sometimes you don't have to tell anyone. The example I like to use is that lights above your desk flickering, and it's flickering, and it's flickering, and it's flickering, and it's flickering. There are ways that a light bulb can stop functioning. And I definitely, I'm sure it's a room full of tech people can figure out some of those ways. You might just be able to do it, and sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Don't get yourselves fired and say, well, Joelle, she told me that I can go and do whatever. I didn't say that. So don't get caught. But there's other accommodations that you don't need to ask, like my weighted lap pad that I take to meetings. There's no reason why I would need to ask someone in my kind of workplace and the environment I'm in to do that. I can just do it. I don't need permission. So where there's things that you don't need permission, just do. I'm a big believer in job modification and crafting. I think this applies to everyone, not just neurodivergent people, but it particularly applies to neurodivergent people. This goes back to that neurotypical full stack developer. Is chances are you've got a team where you have people with different skills, just naturally. And we already do this somewhat with the tech, whereas, oh, I know this person's really good at this back-end code. I know this person's really good at writing C code, and work is kind of distributed on that basis. But also, it can be those other skills too, like, yeah, I know I'm going to be really bad at this task. I've asked coworkers, for instance, and just being very upfront, I said, I know this is a pain, but this is going to require a lot of follow-up over a long period of time. And that's not my skill. Are you willing to do this? And a lot of times they're happy to help me out. And likewise, I found sometimes there's a win-win where the task I'm really good at, they hate. And the thing that makes me want to get up in the morning is the task they hate. So I'll do that task. They're doing the task I hate. And they're really happy because that's what they like to wake up in the morning and do. So job modification, this can be informal or formal, but I recommend it, and I say a company that's trying to be inclusive, they're already doing this. If they're not, they need to start. And then a strategy, because I mentioned some things that are hard to get, like working from home. That's what I call a high status accommodation, because it's typically associated with status. No one's going to tell the CEO can't work from home if the CEO wants to work from home. That CEO has that status. Same with like a private office, which would help so many neurodivergent people. But that's status. You don't get a private office unless you have the status. The way the laws are written in most places, that's not how it works. It's not based on status. Yes, maybe normally it is, but it still can be a valid accommodation. But to get that type of thing, it can be hard. So focus on productivity, focus on what it's going to let you do, that's going to make you more productive, because that's what capitalism cares about, unfortunately. But it also gives everyone an out. Like if it doesn't work, you've got an out. Say, I want to try working from home for a month. And the manager says, well, I'm worried that you're not going to have good communication with the team. Well, let's try it. Let's see if it works. And if it doesn't, then we can reevaluate and have this discussion. But if it does work and we are having good communication, maybe we talk about making this permanent. So that might be one tip. And then kind of my final tip is the more you know other people with similar brains as you have, the more ideas you'll have, the more vision you'll have, the more imagination you'll have about how the workplace can be better for you. So I encourage people to find their people, whatever that means for you. There are tons of neurodivergent communities online. You will probably go into some of them and find them awful. But there are tons of neurodivergent communities online. There's probably one that's not. Some companies have official or unofficial groups. Join them if it's something that is helpful to you. And if they don't, or you can't find your people, I guarantee you're not the only one. So make the space. And maybe you'll take a few tries. Maybe it won't be something that takes off. That's fine too. Just keep trying, and hopefully one of them will stick. So I hope I gave you some ideas here. I hope you've got some thoughts, maybe some inspirations. You know you're not lazy. That's the biggest message. And what I have for myself is not what you need. You need something different. And I hope you can find that. Even if you're not neurodivergent, this is me meeting you halfway, there's probably things that would make your work better. And I encourage you to look for those. This QR code has a link to a ton of different, it's a big markdown file, and it's arranged by like area of need, like I have trouble with attention. And it lists like 10 different possible accommodations that may or may not help you. Most of them probably won't, but some of them might. And it's got different areas like, oh, I'm really easily distracted, or I have trouble with reading, and gives you maybe some practical ideas. It's on GitHub. I always love pull requests. But if you don't even want to do a pull request, just email me. I'll add it. The more ideas we have, the more possibilities people have. Then Neurodivergent Pythonista Discord. If you're neurodivergent or questioning, and a Pythonista, or someone related or connected to a Pythonista, this place is for you. Feel free to join that. I will also put these links in the Discord for the conference. And finally, the resource share in this talk. I haven't uploaded this slide deck, but I will upload it when I'm done. Will be available out there. So thank you so much for your time.